We all asked for it, and they finally did it. Blackmagic finally released a cube camera. The Blackmagic Pyxis is here after blowing up NAB. But in true Blackmagic fashion, what they made isn't exactly what we all asked for. In fact, there's a few fatal flaws in the new Pyxis design, which I'm going to talk about in depth. While Blackmagic may have heard everyone ask them to make a cube camera, they clearly decided not to ask what filmmakers actually wanted from that cube camera. Now, we have all the specs and features of the Pyxis, and we can compare them to the Blackmagic 6K full frame, which I have owned since its release last year. So not only will this be a comparison between the cameras and their features and why you might pick one over the other, it's also a bit of a long-term review of the 6K full frame. So let's take a deep dive and decide which is right for you. Disclaimer, this is absolutely the review that's going to make Blackmagic cancel me, because I'm going to point out some harsh truths about the Pyxis, but somebody has to. And before all the Blackmagic fanboys get irate and jump on me in the comments, let's be clear, I own 4 Blackmagic cameras, which makes me 3 times more of a Blackmagic fanboy than most of you. Now, first is the most obvious and biggest mistake, having the LCD touchscreen on the side instead of the top. The logic being that a camera assist has great access to it from the side. But let's be realistic. The biggest market for this camera is going to be solo owner-operators and indie filmmakers with smaller crews. This is a camera that should have been designed to best and most easily be operated by one person. And that person doesn't want to constantly be checking the side of his camera to change his settings. Solo shooters need to make adjustments quickly on the fly. Speed, adaptability, and efficiency are the name of the game, and having to constantly half flip your camera to go through its settings is the least efficient thing you could be doing when you want to make adjustments. It's weird they chose to do this. In fact, it's kind of mind-boggling because all they would have to do is ask their target demo, a solo filmmaker, where they should put the screen, and I can tell you not a single one would say, put it on the side. I mean, it's absolutely knucking futs that they were so obsessed with the size of this camera body that they would sacrifice putting the screen in a sensible, practical position just to say it was smaller. I mean, all Blackmagic had to do was copy the most popular cube camera on the market right now, the Red Komodo's design. To demonstrate, let's look at the Komodo layout here. I have everything right in front of me. The screen is positioned where I can see it and adjust it quickly at all times. If the screen was on the side, I would constantly be having to turn it sideways or position myself unnaturally before resetting myself to behind the camera again, where most people operate from. I mean, even on a tripod, who as a one-person shooter sits next to their camera instead of behind it? Like, honestly, what were they thinking? That every Pyxis owner also has an assistant camera person sitting beside them dialing in their controls for them? This is a $3,000 camera for people who can't afford a super expensive high-end camera. Are these the people who normally have ACs? I mean, come on guys, read the frickin' room. Know who your product is tailored to. People like me operating on my own who don't want to turn their camera sideways to make changes to it. And look, if they really couldn't figure out how to get the touchscreen on top of the camera, all they had to do was take a leaf out of their own Ursa Mini line and provide a flip-out LCD screen exactly like this one. This would also have been a much simpler, more elegant solution, and I still can't understand why they didn't do one of these things, or even have no touchscreen at all, but a button menu on the top or the side would have made more sense. I mean, this choice makes the least amount of sense from a functional design standpoint. Now, if Blackmagic or a third party releases a touch monitor that allows you camera control, this whole problem will go away. But you have to buy that monitor to make your camera functional, rather than using a pre-existing monitor you already own right now. We have no idea how long it will be before that type of monitor is released. And in the meantime, the positioning of the touchscreen on the 6K full frame is actually much more optimal for solo camera operation than this Cube Pyxis. The Cube they released because they thought that the 6K full frame design wasn't optimal. The next problem with the Pyxis release is that, well, what they're releasing isn't actually a new camera. It's just rehousing for an old camera. They are using the exact same sensor as the sensor for the Blackmagic 6K full frame.
So you can see how nice that looks. So it's a big sensor. I'll turn the camera off.
Which then begs the question, if you own the Blackmagic camera full frame, what motivation would you have to buy the Pyxis? It just feels like a bit of a misstep to talk about this camera like it's the second coming, when in fact, it's very similar to the first coming. And with that in mind, can Blackmagic really say they're coming that hard? I mean, for me, the first Blackmagic Cube camera should absolutely have a better sensor than the last generation 6K full frame. Yes, I'm filming with a Cube, but I'm filming with exactly the same image quality. I mean, they're reusing video they shot with the 6K full frame in the promo material for the Pyxis. And don't get me wrong, the 6K full frame is an awesome camera sensor. I'll talk more about that later, and I absolutely fell in love with the Blackmagic full frame look. But the sensor does have shortcomings. Somewhat limited dynamic range, very limited frame rates and slow motion options, and terrible rolling shutter. Now, addressing and updating any or all of these things in the Pyxis would give many full frame Blackmagic owners way more incentive to buy it. And it would also fully justify the Pyxis increased price tag. Blackmagic also didn't include internal NDs with the Pyxis. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, this is the Poco Mofage. It's a variable ND mount which fits between your camera and the lens. And this, along with the Nisi C5 matte box, has completely solved the lack of ND problem on my 6K full frame. But remember why they said they took out those internal NDs with the 6K full frame? Blackmagic at the time said there wasn't room for them in the original Blackmagic pocket body with the change to L mount. And I can believe that. But now they have a Cube. So you can't tell me that within that Cube they can't fit the internal NDs back in. They can't say it's a space issue. I mean, other camera companies can do it with smaller bodies. So why remove a feature everyone liked? Just feels like going backwards to me. Then we come to the audio ports. Only one XLR and one 3.5mm jack. So we have one less mini XLR than we did on the 6K full frame. And to be honest, this is actually a really big deal to me as someone who shoots a lot of documentary work on my 6K camera. Losing that mini XLR is a big problem, and it's definitely something that hurts the viability of the Pyxis being used as a documentary camera. The preamps on the 6K cameras are really good. I did a whole video about it, and it's always nice to not have to run separate audio. Now, once again, I feel like the box camera was actually an opportunity to introduce two full-size XLR cables and provide better audio options for BM users, not remove one of the mini XLRs, which made the Pocket 6K cameras so handy for run and gun filming. Again, why are we going backwards? The old Pocket 4Ks and 6Ks were the last Blackmagics not to have dual mini XLR inputs. It just feels like another miss for me, and a very legitimate reason for why I personally can't use it for the type of jobs this camera should be designed for. And finally, there's the battery. Oh yes, we have complained bitterly about battery life on Blackmagic cameras before, haven't we? So while it's nice that they are finally addressing this on the Pyxis, it's like they've completely botched the execution. So we can now use Sony BPU batteries for up to 3 hours battery life. Sony BPU batteries? Really? Not cinema standard gold mount or V mount batteries that offer much more flexibility, reliability, and extended runtimes? Not the solution they have already utilized in all their Ursa mini cameras? I mean, it just makes no sense not to have a V mount that you can just slip on the back. I mean, why choose a worse, more limited battery system? There's a reason that many Sony FX6 shooters end up buying a V-mount rig to power their camera. Why are Blackmagic not opting for the battery system they've already been very successfully implementing in their older cameras? I mean, even the biggest BPU battery is going to give you far less watt hours than a large V-mount. And the world of V-mount batteries is constantly innovating with more different I/O ports to power different accessories on your camera. BPU batteries aren't really big enough to offer extra ports. But again, this goes back to either a lack of foresight or a lack of consultation with real filmmakers in the design phase? Is this really another sacrifice just for a smaller, lighter cube? The Komodo X seems to have figured this out. Also, just from a rigging perspective, if you're using a larger style zoom or cine lens, a BPU battery is going to be too small to help balance your rig, whereas a V-mount is the perfect counterweight. Another thing that they seem to have not thought of is that this camera will need an external monitor on it at all times to be usable due to the stupid placement of their touchscreen. And that means that powering that monitor becomes a serious challenge that something like a V-mount could easily solve, while a BPU will require a special ultra expensive version to offer the same thing. The Pyxis is also missing an HDMI out, which means if you have an HDMI monitor, you're going to need to replace it with a more expensive one that has SDI ports. And what if you wanted to use this as a studio camera along with other Blackmagic pockets? With no HDMI cable, you can't connect your Pyxis directly into the A10 Mini Pro. There's not really an easy way to integrate it directly without having to buy extra peripherals. It's not really backwards compatible the way all the other cameras are in the Blackmagic Pocket line. So far, this cube upgrade is feeling way more like a downgrade. And if you really own a 6K full frame, there's just a lot of questionable design choices here that I can't help but see as major problems for me. But let's talk about what you do get. I mean, apart from the new cube shape, what do you get? I mean, there has to be something, right? You get 12G SDI port, which is good for more professional level monitors and live feeds. You get timecode in for linking multiple cameras and audio syncing. You get 2 CF Express slots instead of just the one on the full frame, which definitely is a welcome change to help back up your footage. Well, that's if the camera will allow you to record to both CF Express cards at the same time. But it's actually unclear if this is a feature or if you can only hot swap cards. There's no confirmation of this. So if you can't do dual slot recording, Blackmagic have just added an extra card while missing the purpose of that extra card slot, which sounds very Blackmagic to me. But perhaps the best aspect of the new Pyxis is its Wi-Fi connectivity and streaming capabilities, which can be utilized using the new Ethernet port or by plugging your phone in via USB-C and utilizing its Wi-Fi data. Now, this has lots of applications, from uploading backup copies of your video to the cloud as you film to live streaming. And if I had to point to any reason why, apart from the shape, you might buy this over the 6K full frame, it would be the way in which you could stream live events using the Pyxis. So if that's something you do a lot of, then this camera becomes much more exciting. It also comes in 3 separate mounts: L mount, EF, and PL mount. For me personally, I'd probably choose the L mount version just because you can use adapters for PL and EF lenses, so you actually have all 3 mounting options and all 3 lens types, while with the PL or EF mount, your lens selection will be more limited. Now, if you are a 6K full frame owner and you don't have any use for the streaming abilities of the Pyxis, there really is very little reason to upgrade. You're not going to get a better image, and ironically, you might struggle with that side screen more than you ever did with the full frame's chunky DSLR style body. And that's coming from someone who hates the full frame's chunky style DSLR body. If you're looking to buy one of these 2 cameras and you don't need live streaming, then I'd probably say just save $400 and all the headaches associated with rigging out a cube camera. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've been waiting for a Blackmagic cube camera since forever. I've been begging for a cube since the release of the full frame 6K, but I wasn't begging for this cube. In fact, I don't think many people were. They just haven't quite figured out what's important to camera ops in this price bracket, and for me, it's disappointing. But although the Pyxis may not be the right camera for me, it is 100% a step in the right direction, and I hope Blackmagic take this feedback on board when designing the next version of this. Maybe they'll even ask a filmmaker what they think before making it, rather than a bunch of engineers thinking side screens are it. And now we segue nicely into the Blackmagic camera I do recommend, the Blackmagic 6K full frame cinema camera. Now, for subscribers to the channel, you may have already seen my first impressions of this camera when I hate purchased it on its release. And after months of using it on our latest documentary shooting across the Pacific Islands, I've got a lot more positive things to say about it. While originally I bemoaned the form factor of the Pocket, I managed to rig it out in a satisfactory way that allowed for pretty seamless run and gun filming. And as soon as I started seeing the images I was getting from the camera paired with my vintage Leica Almarit set, I ultimately feel like my hate purchase really paid off. Firstly, full frame is awesome, and I can't say why. I can't say it's just personal preference, but to me, everything looks better on full frame cameras, and the Blackmagic 6K full frame is like the best of the best. The depth, the scope of the images, it's really just magical to put a 24 or 28mm lens on this camera and watch it make magic. It is just nicer than the other Pocket 6K's Super 35 image. I don't know why, it's just better. Open gate as a filming mode is also very cool and gives you a little bit of those IMAX vibes. Josh Sattins did a comparison between the full frame and the Pocket 6K and concluded that there wasn't a difference between them really. But this is the problem with generic, basic batch testing. It doesn't tell the real story. And when you get this camera out in the real world on professional shoots, there is absolutely a difference between the image of the 6K Pro and the 6K full frame. It can't be measured by dynamic range or low light performance. It's just a sense of richness, texture, and depth that can't be quantified. Also, when you pair the full frame camera with Blackmagic's new gyro stabilization, it's insanely good. I mean, take a look at this footage I filmed walking backwards on my Easy Rig with a 24mm lens. Now, look at this same footage when I use gyro. It's gone from completely unusable to very smooth handheld, and that is something nobody's talking about with this camera because the full frame field of view is wider. If you pair wide shots with the gyro, you get the best stabilization of any camera. I mean, it's truly something to behold. You just can't really do this with the original Pocket 6Ks because the image is already so cropped in, you'd be forced to use something like a 14mm lens to get the same type of stabilization, and it will be full of compromises. With the full frame, you can achieve remarkable results, which really eliminates the need for in-camera stabilization. This gyro correction is much better than any in-body camera stabilization from Sony or Panasonic or any lenses, in my opinion. Then we have the other huge highlight of the full frame, and that's its anamorphic modes. If full frame is something extra special, shooting full frame anamorphic is extra special. And I filmed these tests with the Blazar Remus, and man, it just makes you want to constantly shoot with these lenses in this mode with this camera. You just don't get this type of look with the Super 35 sensors, and I cannot say how much I enjoy filming open gate mode with anamorphic lenses. Now, one thing I will say is that the anamorphic D-squeeze options in camera are actually extremely limited, and Blackmagic really need a firmware update that introduces a variety of different anamorphic D-squeeze options, because at this stage, you normally have to use your monitor's D-squeeze modes to really see your final frame. There is no 1.5x open gate mode, for example, so the Remus lenses can't be natively de-squeezed in camera. And speaking of sensor crops, the closest thing you get to a 16:9 image is filming 17:9 6048 by 3200, which leaves black bars at the top and bottom of frame. And I know this may seem like nitpicking, but it means when delivering in 16:9, you always have to crop in slightly on the image. And if you shoot with older Pocket 6K cameras simultaneously like I do, there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of having those black bars or having a full 16:9 frame. It means you can't introduce the full frame into a multicam shoot with older 6K cameras without having to find a way to digitally zoom in. It's not a huge deal, but it's something I found annoying when using the full frame in collaboration with older Pocket 6K Pros. The switch to L mount has also been a big win, as it allows you to use all different types of lenses. I have an EF to L adapter and a PL to L adapter, which has allowed me to grow my PL lens kit to use across all my different cameras and use a lot more cine lenses with a 6K full frame that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. So this really opens up a new world of lens possibilities I didn't have with my older Pocket 6K Pro. Now, in terms of cons, the rolling shutter has definitely been an issue occasionally. Yes, you can apply gyro stabilization to these jello shots to fix them, and it does a reasonable job, but it's not a one-click solution like many have made out. And there are plenty of times that once stabilization is applied, there's still issues. And this is something that needs some readdressing in future sensors. For most of my documentary or corporate work, it's not a problem, but I'd hate to try and shoot a fast-paced handheld fight scene, for example. And really the only other issue is the lack of frame rates beyond 48 frames per second in any of the 6K modes. Now, I really miss the 120 FPS 2.7K mode, which is available in the Pocket 6Ks, but not on full frame. And losing ProRes is also a sad reality of this upgrade, but I will say that after filming in B-RAW for any extended period of time, you'll never want to go back to ProRes. I mean, there's just so much more flexibility in post with B-RAW. And of course, you're getting a free copy of DaVinci Resolve with the camera, which is such a huge bonus. So if we're talking an affordable cinematic look, if we're talking value for money, then either of these cameras has to be in the conversation. And I am much happier with my purchase after nearly 6 months of use than I was when I bought this camera and did my initial first impression review. Now, in my original video about the 6K full frame, I talked about how I was disappointed in the fact that there were no changes to its form factor. Now they've released the Pyxis and I'm disappointed in the changes they made to the form factor. I guess there's just no pleasing some people. At this stage, I'm not even going to buy a Pyxis, and for a lot of people, those with HDMI monitors already, those who want access to more audio ports, and those who don't need Ethernet or SDI, or those who might prefer their built-in monitors to be built into somewhere where they can see them while filming, then the 6K full frame seems like a better option right now, especially when you think about how much money you'll save. Look, if you're dead set on a Cube camera, then the Blackmagic's Cube, the Pyxis, is going to still be the absolute best value in the market. It's just that they already made this camera, and in some ways the first version is more functional. Either way, regardless of your choice, what you do know is that you'll be getting an absolutely beautiful image that will compete with cameras more than double its price. Meanwhile, I'll be waiting for the Blackmagic Pyxis Pocket 6K Pro Cine Ultra, or whatever they want to call the one where they change the position of that touch screen. As always, I am the Savage Filmmaker, and I'll see you when I see you.